Sycamore Lane was the kind of street where wind chimes clinked politely and neighbors judged you by how straight your lawn stripes ran. So when Evelyn Rourke moved into number 14 with no welcome muffins and no visible husband, eyebrows lifted. Before the moving truck left, she was quiet, too quiet for Stanley Cartwright's liking. Stanley was the HOA president, self-appointed, re-elected without contest, and the kind of man who carried a clipboard on morning walks. He'd seen Evelyn just once pulling a dusty duffel from her trunk, a hard black case underneath. That case didn't look like it held tennis rackets. It wasn't long before Stanley started sniffing around. Evelyn's backyard was tucked behind tall hedges, but that shed, reinforced steel frame, double locks, motion lights. It didn't look like storage for shovels and rakes. Stanley had a bad feeling. And bad feelings always led him straight to the rulebook. 2 days later, Evelyn received her first notice, violation for point to be, unapproved external structure, violation 3. 1G, security lighting facing neighboring lots, and a handwritten footnote, please disclose contents of structure for community safety review. Evelyn read it while sipping black coffee, then folded it once and slipped it into the trash without a word. Stanley, of course, took silence as defiance. That Friday, the HOA board gathered at Stanley's living room, sipping lemon water and whispering about Evelyn's background. Murmurs flew. Military, bounty hunter, ex-con? I think she's a survivalist, said Pam from Lot 6. Did you see the knives on her belt last Sunday? She was trimming a bonsai, mumbled Carol. Exactly. That's when Stanley decided if she wouldn't tell them what was inside, they'd make her buy the book. Another letter went out. Failure to comply with board requests regarding potentially dangerous property will result in escalation to local law enforcement and suspension of HOA privileges. Evelyn responded in person this time. She rang Stanley's bell at 7:12 a.m., holding a manila folder. Good morning, she said plainly. This is my compliance package. Stanley blinked. Excuse me? Photos, receipts, and legal registrations. She handed it over and added, and a notarized affidavit confirming that everything in my shed is locked, secure, and fully legal under federal and state law. She turned on her heel. Stanley called after her, ma'am, we still need you to itemize. She paused, glanced over her shoulder. You're not entitled to that list. I know my rights, and if you try again, the next document will come from my attorney. The door clicked shut. Back inside, Stanley fumed. We'll see about that. But the real twist hadn't come yet, because later that evening, a black government sedan rolled quietly into Sycamore Lane and parked right in front of Evelyn's house. 2 men stepped out, plain suits, crisp steps in, walked straight to her door. Neighbors peeked from windows, some ducked behind curtains. Evelyn opened the door, nodded once, and let them in. Stanley's blood pressure spiked. This wasn't supposed to happen. He wasn't dealing with a stubborn neighbor. He was dealing with something else entirely. The government sedan stayed parked outside Evelyn Rourke's house for nearly 3 hours. Neighbors didn't go outside, not even for mail. Stanley Cartwright sat in his den with binoculars and a cold mug of coffee, trying to make out the license plate. The HOA's so-called authority suddenly felt flimsy against the backdrop of black suits and silent nods. The next morning, Evelyn was outside tending her tomatoes like nothing happened. But something had definitely changed. The HOA board met that afternoon, with Stanley pacing the clubhouse floor like a general mid-battle. Pam clutched her purse to her chest like it was a Kevlar vest. I think she's with the ATF, whispered Frank from Lot 9, or CIA, maybe she's on a list. Pam added, what if we're on it now? She's dangerous, Stanley said, slamming his clipboard down. We need answers. If she won't talk, we escalate. Pam leaned in. Escalate how? Stanley's eyes darkened. Law enforcement. Real enforcement. She's hiding something. But before he could finish, an email pinged into his inbox from Evelyn. It was short. Attached is a statement for your records. Your continued harassment is noted. I've also forwarded a copy to my attorney. Any further contact should go through him. Stanley clicked the attachment. 1 page, signed by a military judge, confirming Evelyn's status as a retired Special Operations Commander, clearance level classified, with federally granted rights pertaining to weapons, equipment, and private security autonomy. And below it, one more line in bold, this individual is protected under the Soldiers Civil Relief Act. Any attempt to infringe upon her legal property rights may constitute federal violation. Stanley's stomach dropped. He called an emergency board meeting, but it didn't go how he expected. Pam didn't even show. Frank left halfway through, mumbling about not wanting to be on some kind of watch list. Only Carol stayed, and even she looked uneasy. You need to let this go, Stanley, she said quietly. She's storing a weapon arsenal, Stanley growled. In a family neighborhood, she's a veteran. Carol shot back, she's earned a shed full of cannons if she wants, but Stanley wasn't backing down, not now. Not when his pride was tangled in it. So he called in a favor. A buddy of his from a private security company, ex-cop, no badge anymore, but still with friends on the force. Stanley told him it was a community concern that a suspicious structure might be endangering children. He asked for a check-in. A quiet one, no paperwork. 2 nights later at 2:13 a.m., someone tried to cut Evelyn's fence. What he didn't know was that Evelyn had upgraded more than just locks. Thermal motion sensors picked up his body heat 10 feet before he even reached the shed. Cameras snapped him from 3 angles, and Evelyn already watching, stepped into her backyard in a worn field jacket and boots. She didn't shout. She didn't threaten. She simply turned on the floodlights and said, "That's far enough." The man froze, half crouched behind her compost bin. Evelyn didn't flinch. She picked up her phone and made one call. Exactly 7 minutes later, police arrived. The man was cuffed and loaded into the cruiser. He tried to claim he was just checking on a neighbor. Evelyn handed over her surveillance footage, complete with time-stamped footage of bolt cutters in hand. As the cruiser rolled away, the officer turned to Evelyn and asked, "You want to press charges?" She thought for a moment. "No," she said, "not yet." But the next morning, Stanley opened his door and found a letter taped to the glass. "Your contractor is in custody. The footage has been turned over, and your name, it's all over the incident report. Signed, Evelyn Rourke." By sunrise, Stanley Cartwright knew he'd made a mistake. The contractor he'd sent to sneak into Evelyn Rourke's yard had been booked overnight for trespassing and attempted property tampering. Worse, Evelyn hadn't needed to lift a finger. The cameras had done the work, the law had followed, and now Stanley's name was in a police report. He didn't go outside that morning. His wife, Cynthia, brought in the paper, and the headline slapped him awake: "Decorated veteran thwarts home intrusion suspect tied to HOA president." By noon, 5 homeowners had sent emails demanding a special meeting. One neighbor added, "If you've endangered this community through illegal action, Stanley, you need to step down." But Stanley wasn't folding. He paced his living room like a caged animal, ranting into his Bluetooth headset to anyone who'd listen. "She's manipulating the narrative. This is a setup." Cynthia sat on the couch with her arms crossed. "You picked a fight with a special ops vet who has the government on speed dial. What did you expect?" Stanley stopped mid-stride. "You're on her side now." "I'm on the side of not getting subpoenaed," she snapped, "and frankly, I don't want FBI surveillance vans outside our house." At that, Stanley went pale. That afternoon, Evelyn made her next move, not with lawyers, not with press. She showed up at the monthly HOA meeting uninvited. It was held in the clubhouse like always, plastic folding chairs, awkward coffee station. Stanley gripping the podium like it might save his life. When Evelyn walked in, the room went silent. She wore a simple gray shirt, jeans, and a worn military dog tag that clinked lightly as she took a seat in the second row. Calm, unblinking, Stanley tried to proceed like normal. "Item 1, tree trimming schedule." Evelyn raised her hand. Stanley froze. "Ms. Rourke, this isn't—" "I'll keep it short," she said, standing. "You've harassed me with unlawful demands, targeted me with paranoia, and sent someone into my yard without consent." A few board members shifted uncomfortably. She continued, "I've served 20 years defending freedoms most of you take for granted. I've operated in places where trust was a matter of survival. What I don't tolerate, what I won't tolerate is civilian leadership weaponizing fear to intimidate law-abiding homeowners." No one said a word. Even Stanley was speechless. Evelyn took a step forward. "And let me be perfectly clear, if I am harassed again, if I am slandered, surveilled, or threatened, there will be legal consequences, and I have the resources, knowledge, and context to see it through." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Inside is a cease and desist letter. It names 3 board members directly. "I suggest you all read it carefully." She placed it on the front table. "That's all. Have a nice evening." And she walked out. The door shut behind her with a finality that echoed louder than any gavel. Stanley tried to recover. "Now then, tree trimming," but Pam from Lot 6 stood up, shaking her head. "I'm done," she said. "This is beyond a neighborhood issue. I didn't sign up for war games. I resigned from the board." She walked out. Frank followed. "This isn't worth the liability." By the time the meeting ended, Stanley was left with 3 remaining board members, 2 of whom wouldn't make eye contact. Later that night, Stanley received a letter by certified mail from Evelyn's attorney, a formal notice of intent to sue the HOA for defamation, emotional distress, and targeted harassment. Stanley stared at it, hands trembling, but the worst was still ahead, because the next morning, Evelyn's yard wasn't quiet. It was crawling with journalists. One of them knocked on Stanley's door. "Mr. Cartwright? Channel 8 News." Would you like to comment on your alleged role in the attempted intrusion of a decorated veteran's home? As Stanley slammed the door, Stanley Cartwright tried to lay low. He stopped trimming his hedges. He canceled the monthly HOA newsletter. Even his clipboard sat untouched on the hall table, its absence more noticeable than its presence ever was. But the neighborhood didn't forget. Evelyn's story had already hit 3 local stations and a military veterans blog that had gone viral overnight. The headline was direct: Special Ops veteran harassed by HOA, but she fought back with the law. Stanley's inbox was on fire. Some neighbors praised Evelyn publicly, now leaving notes on her porch, offering pie, shaking her hand when she passed. Others sent Stanley messages laced with words like shameful, overreach, and resign. It wasn't just embarrassment anymore. It was exposure. But Stanley wasn't the only one feeling the heat. Because behind Evelyn's cool demeanor and steely discipline, something had shifted. She wasn't sleeping well. Each time she closed her eyes, memories clawed their way back: convoy ambushes, blackout nights, the sharp sting of betrayal in places far more dangerous than Brookline Estates. The HOA's intrusion hadn't just poked at her privacy, it had torn through years of silent healing. Still, Evelyn kept her expression composed. She focused. She acted. And this time, she wasn't alone. A week after the cease and desist, an unassuming woman pulled up in an old Jeep Liberty and parked right across from Stanley's home. She wore jeans, a camo cap, and aviators. She carried a clipboard, but not the HOA kind. She knocked on Evelyn's door and was welcomed with a warm handshake and a cup of coffee. Her name was Lena Brooks. She was a former Army lawyer and now ran a legal initiative for veterans targeted by homeowner associations and local ordinances. "We've had 14 cases in the past year," Lena said, flipping through papers. "But yours, it's special. You have documentation, video, media attention." They didn't just mess with a veteran, they trampled federal protections. Evelyn nodded slowly. "So what happens next?" Lena looked up. "We file for damages. And we call for a formal HOA board review under the State Housing Commission." Evelyn's eyes didn't blink. "Let's make it public." That Friday, Evelyn and Lena stood in front of a podium in the middle of Sycamore Lane. Cameras were already in place. Neighbors gathered, some to support, others to gawk. Stanley watched from behind his blinds, sweat gathering at the collar. Evelyn stepped to the microphone and spoke with quiet precision. "For those watching, I'm not here to embarrass anyone. I'm here because my rights as a citizen, a homeowner, and a veteran were violated. When I moved to Brookline Estates, I wanted peace. Instead, I was surveilled, harassed, and targeted for owning legal, registered property." She paused. "I won't stand by while others are made to feel unsafe for living within the law, especially those who've already served this country." The crowd stayed silent, trapped. Then Lena stepped up and made it clear the HOA had 14 days to comply with the demands, or they'd see them in court. Later that night, Stanley held an emergency board call via Zoom, but only one member joined and left after 2 minutes. No one wanted to be part of the sinking ship. That was when Stanley did something desperate. He sent an anonymous tip to a neighborhood watchdog Facebook group, claimed Evelyn was hiding more than firearms, and suggested federal agents might be investigating her, not protecting her. The post gained traction. People shared it. One neighbor even reposted it with siren emojis. But Evelyn had already anticipated this, because by morning, her lawyer had issued a cease and desist to the group admin and had traced the post back to a burner account connected to Stanley's own IP address. She didn't respond online. She responded with action. That evening, Evelyn invited 3 local news crews to tour her shed. Cameras recorded every square inch. It was organized, locked, legal, firearms stored properly, tags and permits on display. The reporters asked, "Why show this now?" Evelyn looked into the lens and said, "Because they tried to make my silence look like guilt. And I'd rather show the truth than fight rumor with noise." The news coverage should have ended it. Evelyn Rourke had dismantled the rumors with clear footage, clean records, and a statement that turned even the skeptics quiet. Her neighbors were no longer whispering about the shed, they were waving as she passed. But for Stanley Cartwright, the silence only built pressure. He wasn't used to losing. His authority had once been absolute. He dictated fence paint colors and flower pot placement with a single memo, but now he couldn't even get the gardener to answer his calls. And the HOA was unraveling. 2 board members resigned. The bank account was under freeze pending the state investigation. Meetings were canceled. Contractors had walked away. So Stanley fell back on what he knew: control from the shadows. Late one night, a man named Russell Knox appeared at Stanley's back door, a former associate from his old security consulting days. Russell had a different kind of reputation: quiet favors, no questions. Stanley met him in the dim kitchen and whispered words That should never be spoken. She has documents, maybe. More something she's not saying. I need to know what else is in that shed. Russell didn't blink. You want it looked into? Stanley nodded. Quietly, Russell smiled. Leave the gate open. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. She didn't know why. The wind barely moved the trees. The air hung heavy, and her gut whispered something she hadn't heard since her days abroad. Something wasn't right. She rose just after midnight, slipped into her boots, checked the cameras, all clear. Then, at 2:08 a.m., a silent ping. One motion sensor fence perimeter. The feed showed nothing, but Evelyn knew better. She moved without a sound, sliding out the back door and stepping into the yard with only the moonlight and her instincts. Nothing stirred. Not the hedges, not the soil, not the wind, until she reached the back corner. A thin wire ran across the dirt. New, clumsy, amateur. Evelyn knelt, listened. A shift in the leaves. A footfall, someone breathing wrong. She spoke, just once. You've got 3 seconds to leave before I assume intent. Silence, then a shadow bolted for the exit gate. Evelyn sprinted forward, closing the distance in seconds. She didn't draw a weapon. She didn't need to. Her body was a machine built for moments like this. She reached the figure and pinned them against the fence in a single motion. Named now. The figure stammered, I didn't take anything. The voice was familiar, not Russell's, not even an outsider. It was Todd. Todd Crenshaw, Lot 7, longtime board member, always sat next to Pam. Evelyn stepped back, her jaw clenched. You, he raised his hands. Stanley asked me to find something, said we needed to protect the community. Said you were dangerous. Her breath slowed, but her eyes didn't. What exactly were you trying to find? Todd, bombs, treason. A reason to justify your paranoia. Todd couldn't answer. She let him go with a warning. Leave now. And if I ever see you near my property again, I'll involve the real authorities, not your buddy Stanley. Todd ran, but the damage was done. The next morning, Evelyn met Lena Brooks at her kitchen table. Fresh coffee, stale silence. They sent someone else, Evelyn said quietly this time. It wasn't a stranger. Lena shook her head. That's retaliation. That's criminal. We filed today. Evelyn said, no more waiting. No. More speeches. Lena nodded and opened her laptop. Then let's bury them in the thing they fear most, truth in writing. By the afternoon, the civil suit hit the HOA's inbox like a hammer, not just for harassment but for coordinated intimidation, illegal surveillance, and negligent leadership. Todd's name was included, so was Stanley's. And thanks to the police report from the earlier break-in, the paper trail was airtight. Stanley read the notice 3 times in a row, then he made his final mistake. He showed up at Evelyn's doorstep sweating, fuming, and not alone. With him were 2 men. One held a clipboard. The other wore a badge. A county code enforcement officer. Stanley pushed forward. We're here to assess your shed for non-compliant structural violation, possible permit issues. Evelyn stepped outside, shut the door behind her, and stood tall. Didn't you hear? She said softly. I don't open my door to liars. The officer frowned. We received an anonymous tip. Evelyn held up her phone. And I've already filed a request for legal counsel to be present during any inspection. Unless you have a court order, you'll need to leave. The officer paused. Stanley stepped forward. You can't hide behind rules forever, Evelyn. She tilted her head. I'm not hiding. I'm enforcing. Then she tapped a button on her phone. The shed doors behind her opened automatically, revealing lights, labeled gear, documents, and transparent holders, and a large, professionally framed plaque on the wall. Property secured under Federal Veterans Act. Entry without warrant is unlawful. The officer blinked, stepped back. Stanley stood frozen. And Evelyn? She smiled. Evelyn Rourke hadn't cried in years, not when she buried comrades. Not when she folded the flag over her husband's casket, not even when she returned home, decorated but invisible, carrying memories no one wanted to ask about. But the envelope sitting on her kitchen counter that morning made her fingertips tremble. No return address, no stamp. Just her name, handwritten block letters. Like someone who still drilled formation, she opened it slowly. Inside, a single photo, grainy, dated. It was from Kandahar, a mission she hadn't spoken of in over a decade, for soldiers. One woman in the center, her, and to the right, a man she'd once trusted with her life. He went by Reed. She turned the photo over, 5 words scratched in jagged pen. He's not done watching you. Her stomach tightened. That name hadn't passed her lips in 12 years. Reed Dalton. Her former commanding officer, court-martialed, discharged, buried in scandal, and disappeared into civilian shadows. She thought he was gone. But now Evelyn knew this war had just opened another front. Meanwhile, Stanley Cartwright was spiraling. His HOA presidency was a ghost title now. The board had dissolved under pressure. His neighbors were avoiding eye contact. His wife had left town to visit her sister but hadn't said when she'd return. His last move, the code enforcement stunt, had backfired spectacularly. The officer refused to return his calls. The county attorney was reviewing misconduct. Evelyn's attorney had filed an additional charge for attempted unlawful inspection. Stanley was cornered, but he wasn't alone that night. A man knocked at his door, quiet, tall, civilian clothes but too sharp to be casual. Reed Dalton. I hear you've got a vet problem, he said, stepping inside without waiting. Stanley blinked. Who are you? Let's just say I used to know Evelyn before she was pruning bushes in suburbia. Stanley poured them both a drink. Voice shaky, she's tearing down everything I built here. Reed smirked. I know. She's efficient like that. Stanley leaned in. You said you knew her. I led her, Reed said, his tone turning cold. And I know her weaknesses. She hides them well, but I know the cracks. Stanley hesitated. What are you suggesting? Reed tapped the photo he'd brought, same as the one in Evelyn's envelope. Every warrior has a past. We make sure hers comes back at just the right moment. Evelyn wasn't waiting around. She sent Lena Brooks a copy of the photo. Someone's digging, she said, and they know where to hurt. Lena responded in minutes. Dalton? If he's involved, this isn't just HOA harassment. This is targeted intimidation from someone who has a vendetta. Evelyn nodded, and a record of crossing lines. Lena leaned back. What do you want to do? Evelyn stared out the window toward her shed. I want to make this public before they do. 3 days later, Evelyn sat down with a national news crew. The interview aired during prime time. Titled, From Kandahar to Suburbia, a decorated veteran's stand against HOA tyranny. Evelyn laid it all out. Her career, her record, the home she bought for peace. The neighbors who weaponized paranoia, the break-ins, the sabotage, the recent letter. I thought I left war behind, she said calmly on camera, but sometimes it follows you home in different uniforms. The footage showed Evelyn's security system, the legal paperwork, and a gentle pan across her medals, none shown to brag. Just facts, earned, not explained. It was powerful. And it lit the fuse. The next morning, Stanley's phone rang at 5:12 a.m. He groaned, reached over, and answered. It wasn't Reed. It was the county investigator, Mr. Cartwright. We have some questions regarding recent contact with individuals under federal scrutiny. A representative will be visiting your residence this week. Stanley sat up. I didn't know he was a click. He looked outside. A sedan idled on the street. Inside Evelyn's house, there was no fear, no tension. She brewed coffee, watered her plants, watched the morning fog lift off her lawn. Because if Reed had come back to finish old business, he'd underestimated something. She wasn't the same soldier anymore. She was smarter, calmer. And this time, she had the law at her back. The courtroom smelled like polished wood and cold coffee. It was a modest county space, nothing flashy. But the weight inside felt heavy enough to crack the floor. Evelyn Rourke sat at the plaintiff's table, composed in her navy blazer, her posture perfect, her hands folded, her eyes locked on the bench ahead. Across from her sat Stanley Cartwright, red-faced, fidgeting. His lawyer whispered into his ear every few seconds. But Stanley barely heard. He was too busy watching the cameras. In the gallery, 2 local stations, a military watchdog, and 1 national syndicate reporter who hadn't blinked since the hearing began. The judge entered with the kind of calm authority that made everyone sit straighter. Evelyn didn't flinch. She'd faced fire far louder than gavels. The clerk. Read the charges: harassment, coordinated defamation, unlawful entry attempt, retaliatory surveillance, and now conspiracy to intimidate a protected federal veteran. Stanley's attorney tried to play it down. Your Honor, this is a case of miscommunication, of neighborly misunderstanding taken too far. Evelyn's lawyer, Lena Brooks, stood tall. Your Honor, this is not about misunderstanding. This is about misuse of power. A private citizen, decorated for service to her country, targeted by a board meant to maintain flowers and fences, not destroy lives, the judge motioned for witnesses. Lena nodded to Evelyn. She stood and stepped into the witness box. The courtroom hushed. I bought my home to start fresh, to find peace, Evelyn began, but instead, I was treated like a threat, not because I broke laws, but because I didn't bow. She detailed the letters, the surveillance, the forced inspections, the break-ins, the anonymous rumors. Then she paused, and then came the photo. The judge leaned forward. Lena placed the grainy Kandahar photo on the projector screen. Do you recognize the man on the right? Evelyn nodded once. Yes. Name, Reed Dalton. Former commanding officer, dishonorably discharged. Why is this significant? Because he showed up in this town, at the home of the defendant, after I received this photo. No stamp, no return address, just a thread in pen. The room stirred. Stanley's lawyer objected. Speculation. But then Lena turned. Your Honor, we don't need to speculate. We have a statement. The courtroom doors opened, and in walked someone no one expected. Todd Crenshaw, former board member. Lot 7, nervous, sweaty, but walking with purpose. He took the stand, cleared his throat. and began to speak. I was part of it, Todd said. Stanley told us Evelyn was dangerous. He said she had weapons, secrets. He kept using the word unstable. And when that didn't work, he brought in someone else. Who? The man who came to his house, Reed. Todd looked toward Evelyn, ashamed. I didn't know who he was until now. But I heard them talking about digging up her past, using her record against her. Stanley erupted. That's a lie. You're covering your... The judge banged his gavel. Mr. Cartwright, sit down. Todd kept going. I broke into her yard. I'm not proud of it. I was scared, manipulated. I didn't know what Evelyn had done because she hadn't done anything. She just didn't follow his orders. That was the problem. Silence hung in the room. The judge looked from Todd to Stanley. Then to Evelyn. I've heard enough for today, he said. We'll reconvene tomorrow for closing remarks. As everyone stood, Stanley tried to rush out. But reporters followed like sharks scenting blood. Evelyn didn't move. She gathered her files, nodded to Lena, and walked out the front doors of the courthouse with her head high. Outside, someone clapped. One neighbor. Then another, not loud, not staged. Just a quiet sign that the tide had turned. Later that evening, Stanley sat alone in his den, surrounded by silence. No board to back him. No HOA to hide behind. And now no defense strong enough to cover what was coming next, because the judge's tone had shifted, and Evelyn, she wasn't finished. The courtroom was packed. Standing room only. Neighbors who once stayed silent now showed up early, whispering behind cell phones and coffee cups. Evelyn Rourke entered quietly, flanked by Lena Brooks and her legal team. No fanfare, just calm resolve. Her eyes scanned the crowd once, then settled on the bench. Stanley Cartwright sat at the defense table like a man in freefall. His suit looked stiffer than he did, the tie too tight, the air too thin. The press cameras were ready, pens dancing across notepads like storm clouds before a downpour. The judge entered and the murmurs died. This court has reviewed all testimony, all evidence, and has taken time to weigh the nature of this conflict, he began, voice firm but even. While HOA boards are given certain powers, those powers come with limits and responsibilities. Mr. Cartwright and his board not only overstepped those limits, they trampled the line entirely. Stanley shifted. The judge continued, coordinated harassment, defamation, retaliation using local enforcement, and in the court's view, a willful attempt to discredit a federally protected veteran with malicious intent. He looked straight at Evelyn. Ms. Rourke, this court recognizes your service, your restraint, and your commitment to the truth. Judgment is in your favor. Gasps echoed. The HOA is to pay all legal fees, civil damages totaling $145,000, and is hereby placed under a 6-month audit by the State Housing Commission. Furthermore, Mr. Cartwright is barred from holding any future HOA board position within the state. Stanley slumped, but the judge wasn't finished, and finally, a formal statement of apology will be issued by the board and published in the community's official records and newsletter. He banged the gavel once. Court is adjourned. Outside, the air was electric. Reporters swarmed. But Evelyn didn't speak right away. She didn't need to. Her victory wasn't in the cameras. It was in every neighbor who now stood behind her, nodding, clapping, finally seeing what she'd endured in full. Then Evelyn stepped up to the microphones. She cleared her throat. Let this case be a warning and a reminder. Rules should protect people, not control them. And titles don't make leaders. Integrity does. She didn't gloat. She didn't scold. She spoke like a soldier, and the nation listened. Weeks passed. The neighborhood was different now. The HOA's old website went dark. A new interim board was formed quietly, humbly. The clubhouse was reopened, this time with a community potluck and no clipboards in sight. Neighbors stopped whispering and started waving. Kids played in the streets again without parents peeking through blinds. But Stanley Cartwright, he sold his house. A for sale sign appeared one early morning, and by dusk, a moving van was already outside. No one said goodbye. The only thing left behind was a rolled-up banner in the clubhouse closet that read, Community First, Stanley Cartwright, President. No one bothered unrolling it. One quiet Saturday morning, Evelyn stood by her shed, watering her garden when a teenager from two streets over stopped by, a shy girl, maybe 15. Ms. Rourke, she asked. My brother's a Marine. He said what you did was badass. Evelyn smiled faintly. Tell him thank you and keep his head down. The girl laughed. Are you gonna run for the new board? Evelyn tilted her head. No, she said. But I'll keep an eye on them. The girl grinned. Good. And just like that, the wound that once bled bitterness slowly started to scar. Later that evening, Evelyn opened her mailbox. Inside was a small envelope. No return address. She froze for a moment. But this time, the paper felt different, lighter. She opened it carefully. A note, just one sentence. She made it home, too. Thought you should know. Tucked inside the envelope was another photo. This one wasn't grainy. It was bright, clear. A woman in fatigues standing beside a child, smiling, one of her old unit mates, long thought lost. Evelyn stood there a while, blinking hard. Some battles stay with you, some scars never fade. But some victories, they come quietly and they last.